Out here in this hellish heat, one must work to conserve any moisture they've been blessed enough to possess. And yet, spitting is the only way I know to punctuate sentences. Oh shoot, my Zin! You know, the problem I've had with this series is that the sequence of events gets so convoluted that it's hard to make time to communicate the part of history that's always drawn me towards it. This is all happening to people. People are being shaped, they're being pressed to the grindstone of history. Also, it's hard to find time to communicate what parts of Earth have actually been Serbian this entire time. So I want to start with a little story. In 1870, an 11-year-old German boy was playing with his little brother outside in the town of Fredericksburg, Texas. They do ghost tours and have some cute old buildings there now. It's a common day trip for those that live in San Antonio and can't afford to go to Green. I got drunk there once. I wait my plaque, Texas Historical Association. Now what that boy and his little brother didn't realize was they were being watched, and they were about to earn a plaque. Unbeknownst to these boys, a Mescalero Apache raiding party had stopped on a nearby ridge to water their horses, many of which they had just stolen. The Mescalero had by this point been dealing with the U.S. for some time. After making peace with the U.S. in the early 1860s, they'd been forced on a death march to the Bosque Redondo Indian Reservation. And once they arrived, they found a barren wasteland in which nothing grew, a place where even the water was poison. They would languish on the reservation for some time before making their escape, and upon doing so, would continue their war against the U.S. To quote a Mescalero Apache's testimony from Apache Voices, "The Navajos were brought there and camped above us on the Rio Pecos. They'd got the sickness from the soldiers, what you call the smallpox, and they died, lots of them. The bodies were thrown into the river, and the Mescaleros saw them and knew that if they drank the water it would make the disease, so they just left, and they went back to their home." Why would you settle for peace with the U.S. like they did that, and then they had a worse time than when they were at war? Why settle for peace when peace didn't mean the U.S. was actually going to stop trying to kill you? That is the allure of peace, is it not? Like, yeah, your enemies get to live now, which sucks, but you get to live too, and that's pretty nice. The Apache were not Girl Scouts, and we're about to share some heinous shit. But that heinous shit came from a place of fury and desperation. The Mescalero were taught a lesson at the Bosque Redondo. The U.S. had told them that if they were good Indians on the reservation, then everything would be okay. But the problem was what a good Indian was to the United States. You ever watch Starship Troopers? That bit near the beginning, the propaganda reel?
Anger. The only good bug is a dead bug.
That was lifted from a famous quote by U.S. General Philip Sheridan. "The only good Indian is a dead Indian." It was during this period of total war with an industrial nation that desired their extermination that many Apache would begin to follow a different kind of leader. Before war with the U.S., the most influential Apache were, yes, great warriors, but they were also kind to their people and generous to their allies. Being good at killing doesn't make you worthy of being a chief, even among the Apache. A great warrior and a great leader were not one and the same. But when war is the only option you have left, when the jaws of history snap shut, that's the only kind of man you can follow. Herman Lehman didn't know any of this yet. No, he was not subscribed to me. And like most cowards that don't subscribe to me, he was playing outside like an asshole. He was the kid playing with rocks with his little brother in Fredericksburg. While the Mescalero Apache were watering their horses on the ridge overlooking Herman's home, the war chief looked out over the Texas prairie. In a world as hard and cruel as this, it is human nature to follow the cruelest, hardest man you can find. And his name was Carnoviste, the Wolf. The captain of the raiding party was Carnoviste. He was a pretty cruel man. Carnoviste wasn't hated by the Mescaleros, but people were scared of him, and so that is why he existed. The raiding party had been successful, and they had stolen many horses. They stopped to rest their mounts on a ridge overlooking a small stream. When they looked down over the ridge, they saw a small cabin on the other side of the stream. The cabin was in a field surrounded by a rock fence, and there were children playing in the field. Carnoviste told the raiding party, "I want one of those children." Herman Lehman's account of his time with the Apache is the most haunting historical account I've ever read for a few reasons, but the biggest is there's no romance to it. Herman didn't record his perspective until years after he was returned to his family once he was an old man. And it's a hard thing as a man, to come by your pain honestly, particularly when that pain is something which can be romanticized. War is bad, and it sucks, but you know, give it a little spin. It wasn't the jaws of history snapping shut around me. Actually, I was just a badass. When we describe our pain and struggles, we try to be a little Ryan Gosling about it, you know, at best. We put our pain in a cool jacket so girls want to fuck it. Nobody wanted to fuck Herman. Corno Viste had me with him. We found a young calf lying down. He made signs for me to catch that calf using about the persuasion you would to a dog. I was afraid not to obey him, so after the young bovine I went and caught him. Corno Viste jumped down, cut the calf's throat, cut it open, plunged his knife into its stomach, got out the soured milk contents, and ate that nasty stuff with a relish that was sickening to see. I turned away disgusted and sick to the stomach. He made signs for me to eat some, but I made signs that I could not and would not. He grabbed me and soused my head into that calf's paunch and rubbed that nauseous stuff all over my face, in my eyes, up my throat, into my ears, and forced some down my throat. He held my nose and made me swallow, but the stuff would not stay in my stomach, and I vomited copiously. He then cut out the kidneys and liver and compelled me to eat some of them while they were warm with the animal heat. I would vomit the mess up, but he would gather it up and make me swallow the same dose again, and again I would vomit. He would soak it in the warm blood and make me swallow it down again. The blood settled my stomach, and I finally retained the revolting filth. Then Corno Viste took me to a hole of water, washed my face, put me on the horse with him, and we went to rejoin the other Indians of our party. Yeah, you may have noticed I didn't put a page number. It's page 5, and it's all downhill from there. It's a big recurring motif in Herman's account, being made to eat raw internal organs as some sort of test. When I read his account, I was like, the Apache cook their food. I've seen many indications that they cooked their food. That was not normal to just eat a bunch of raw organs. Why was this such a big deal? Honestly, Corno Viste was just sort of a huge dick, and he kept making Herman eat raw, nasty internal organs and shit, whereas Shivato, a Lipan Apache who participated in the raid on Herman's home, was much kinder to the boy. Bear in mind I am quoting the grandson of Shivato, but Shivato was kinder to Herman in Herman's own words, so this does check out. But it was just the hatred Corno Viste had. Then he would rub the entrails of the calf or antelope over Herman's face. Shivato, after washing Herman's face off, would give him some regular, good meat to eat. Herman would end up being adopted by the Mescalero Apache after he proved that he could keep down raw meat without vomiting. That is a huge achievement, because I don't think any Mescalero Apache could do that. But you see, this is what I mean about there being this great potential for romanticizing the whole thing. The adolescent boy grew into a fierce Apache warrior. But Herman doesn't shy away from the horror. He communicates the reality that at the age of 11, he was drafted into the total war for survival. We came into a plain road and discovered a wagon in which there was a man and woman and 3 children. Before they were aware of our presence, we had them surrounded, and it was but the work of a few seconds to kill and scalp the man, woman, and a little baby. The 2 other children we carried with us, a little girl about 8, and a boy about 6 years old. The poor little children would not eat. We carried them 4 days and nights, and they cried all of the time. We could not sneak around and steal anything for the noise they made, so 2 Apache men rode up, one on each side of the little girl. The one on the left took her left hand and foot, and the Indian on the right took her right hand and foot. They raised her from the horse on which she sat and drove the horse away and swung her 3 times. The 3rd time turned her loose. She cut a somersault in the air, and when she struck the ground, she was dead, and every Indian rode over the mangled corpse. My favorite thing I learned about Apache culture came from Western Apache raiding and warfare. It pertained to pregnant women. Not a tender and caring people, the Apache, but we all have that side to us, and naturally it comes out in the context of child rearing and family stuff. The Apache of the 19th century were laconic and brutal and severe, but, they were people. I've made poison for arrows lots of times. They used to say that if a pregnant woman farted into the poison, then it would surely be deadly. But they never did this. It was only a joke. Wait, that wasn't it. Husbands of pregnant women cannot go to war. It makes them too heavy. Now, there's quite a bit of difference, between the Western Apache tribes and the Mescalero in the East. All the same, there wasn't this much of a difference normally. Children were often born to Apache women who were with raiding parties. I've known women to give birth to a child, abandon it immediately, and proceed on with the party with no apparent injury. I knew one woman of the Apaches who gave birth to twins, and she became so angry because there were 2 children instead of 1, that she stamped her offspring to death and left their little bodies for the vultures to devour. What is described in Western Apache raiding and warfare is normal. That's normal Apache culture. What Herman describes is not normal. In the last video, I described to you how the Chiricahua Apache could eke out dignity in a conflict that we would describe now as unwinnable. How after over a decade of fighting, the great chief Cochise managed to secure a reservation, where his people could still live free as they had for centuries before he unfortunately passed away young due to stomach cancer. But of course, the Chiricahua had yet to understand what peace was to the United States. And that we may have had them sign a piece of fucking paper, and we said that meant something. The war wasn't really over. I mean, they were still bad Indians. We end this introduction on the most haunting portion of Herman's account. This video series is focused on the Chiricahua, and it will continue to do so, but the Mescalero experience was no less complex, real, and haunting. Herman would become a respected and trusted warrior, and was at one point sent by Carnoviste to seek out a new place to live. As the white population grew larger and larger in Mescalero territory, Herman would find a wonderful place filled with plentiful game, and fresh water, and some shiny rocks. We reported to Carnoviste that we had found an earthly happy hunting grounds where the Great Spirit dwelt in every canyon and where his smile kissed every mountaintop at sunrise each morning. Carnoviste grunted his satisfaction and delight, but when we showed him the pretty rocks we'd brought back with us, he sorrowfully shook his head and said that inviting region was not for the Indian, that it would prove a delusion and a snare, and if we went there it would only increase our troubles, and we gave up all hope of ever finding a land where the white man would not come. Alright, we will go back outside in a minute. We gotta cross some T's and dot some I's, and I'm hiding from the International Criminal Court. They slipped and they fell onto the white phosphorus. So clumsy, those women and children. And they'll never catch me, because I use incognito. I gave them a fake address, telling them that I still lived at your mother's house. As you and I both know, I actually moved out due to that thing she always did with her feet. I live now in an undisclosed location. You could say the same if you used Incogni. Incogni works on your behalf, undertaking the laborious and confusing process of removing your data from data brokers, including people search sites. What was on you? All you have to do is sign up, preferably using my coupon code like all the cool kids are doing. Using Incogni not only protects your privacy from the unfair judgments of the International Criminal Court and your mother, Deborah, who needs to move on, but also scam artists, robocallers, and canvassers. I know election season is a ways away, but Incogni can help you avoid the inevitable fundraising calls from the presidential campaign of Whoopi Goldberg. I can see the future. Incogni can't help with that. I bought that power from a witch. What Incogni can do is help you maintain your privacy, doing the hard work while you can rest easy. Use my coupon code DJPeach for 60% off an annual plan. That's right, 60% off an annual plan. Thank you, Incogni, for sponsoring this video. Also, while I was at Big Bend, I was so stunned by the natural splendor of America's heartland that I forgot to say it's Yeehaw Fall. Go listen to my podcast. Let's talk about male mental health. You don't need therapy. You don't need medicine. Your delusions of grandeur are nothing more than the call to greatness. And the voices in your head, well, those are simply the angels speaking to you. You're the chosen one, you know that? If you're feeling down in the dumps, all you gotta do is read dusty books about men brutalizing each other for pennies in the desert. Do you need to heal? Or is that gay as fuck? Or do you need to read Geronimo's autobiography and unlock your Apache masculinity? As I said in the last video, 4 tribes fell under the designation of Chiricahua Apache. These were the Chaconan, the Nedni, the Batoncohe, and the Chihene. These 3 were all on the Chiricahua Reservation, whereas the Chihene were on a different reservation at the Ojo Caliente. Life on these reservations, it wasn't bad at all. It was mostly unchanged from traditional Apache life. their territory was reduced, but to make up for that, they were issued rations by the United States government. Furthermore, the territory these reservations were established in were places where they had lived before. In particular, the Chihenne were very attached to the Ojo Caliente hot springs. They considered it the best place on earth in which to live. Oftentimes in records, the Chihenne were actually referred to as the Warm Springs Apache for this reason. I cannot emphasize enough how closely the Chihenne identified themselves with the Ojo Caliente. Now, the Chiricahua Reservation, where these three were, and the Ojo Caliente, where I'm so tired of turning around. My God, I'm getting dizzy. These reservations were in stark contrast to the San Carlos Reservation. The San Carlos Reservation was established in a place where no Apache had previously lived. Malaria and dysentery were common. The Apache were forced to farm, wear numbered tags, and report to daily headcounts. Furthermore, we'll get into how corrupt most agents assigned to run the San Carlos Reservation were. So those rations that I mentioned, they weren't all given to the Apache. They were often sold on the side so that the agent could pocket the cash. It's important to note why those rations were given. When you take people that supported themselves by hunting and gathering or farming over a certain amount of land, and then you take most, some, or all of that land, then you need to give those rations to prevent starvation. When those rations were taken by the agent and sold on the side, naturally that increased the likelihood of breakouts and raids. Now I know, why didn't they just starve to death? Well, they were troublemakers. It's important to also mention here the Indian Ring. Surrounding the US military and the reservation system at this time were contractors who themselves profited handsomely from, well, the Indians not getting all the rations they were due, and also from Indian wars. These were contractors who plotted to extend these wars, so they could continue lining their pockets. Corruption was common, and no small part of the shit show that this video will describe benefited these contractors. A famous leader of the Apache Scouts, who once kept an Apache scalp as tent decor until someone told him, "It's a little messed up, buddy," said this of San Carlos. The malaria-reeking flats of the San Carlos, where the water is salt and the air poison, and one breathes a mixture of sand blizzards and more flies than were supposed to be under the care of the great fly god Beelzebub. Now, I understand the situation as I've described it here. It's a little complicated, right? Especially all these different Apache tribes on all these different reservations, and this is just the Chiricahua specifically. I get it, you're gamers, and I like to keep the narrative chugging along so we can all get back to buying Fortnite dances for our Discord kittens. But this is very important to the story. I'm a storyteller, and this story has all these fucking details. All these reservations, the different ways in which they were run and managed, like, what a headache. Well, don't worry. The United States government has an idea. In 1874, the peace policy of the Bureau of Indian Affairs was changed in Arizona to a policy of containment, where several bands would be concentrated on a single reservation, San Carlos, in order to make them easier to control and to reduce the number of raids. The new policy had disastrous consequences in Arizona. Also, there was gold on the Chiricahua Reservation. There was always conflict between the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the military, and the Apache, like many Indian nations, would find themselves caught between the two. Is an Indian reservation a place where we civilized the savage red man and taught him to live as white men did? Or a prisoner of war camp? Or a smaller nation within the broader nation that was the United States government with its own laws and government? The Department of the Interior says, shrug emoji. Depends on the reservation, depends who's in charge of it, depends on how the president's morning bowel movement went. Hell, most of the time seems that Indian reservations were just the place where we sent our most incompetent and crooked bureaucrats. The curse of dual control was one of the many consequences of the United States' schizophrenic Indian policy. Reservations would be administered by agents assigned by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but guarded by the military. At times, the conflict between the military and the Bureau reached hilariously absurd levels, and in the middle of this conflict were innocent Apache attempting to acquiesce to literally impossible demands, being starved by agents on one side and prevented from hunting and also raiding, let's be honest, by the military on the other. It was in this contentious situation that 23-year-old John Clum found himself after he was chosen as the agent of the San Carlos Reservation. That was the poison shit show where Hope went to die. That's the one that still exists. Clum ordered a count of the Indians, and an officer ordered a military count of them at the same hour, threatening to attack those who responded to Clum's demand. Clum rode his horse over to confer with the beef contractor at the fort, and the officer of the day tried to arrest him for riding too fast on the parade ground. Clum insisted that all Indians should be under his control, so an officer released all guardhouse prisoners, including 2 murderers Clum wanted held. The San Carlos Reservation was larger than Rhode Island and contained hundreds of pissed-off, starving Apache when this, once again, 23-year-old man was put in charge of it. The United States government didn't trust me to pee into a cup without, of course, closely observing my penis when I was 23 years old, but sure, we'll give this guy an Indian reservation. An impossible situation was handed to John Clum, and he is funny, and I will make fun of him. But he clearly was competent. He managed something that I don't think I could, and I'm a YouTuber. I'm like the smartest guy I know. On my resume, I just put ludonarrative dissonance. Regardless, Clum was given a series of impossible situations, and he sorta did great. But he was also my funny little man. Look at him. He's my funny little man. Clum's youthful inexperience daunted him not at all as he took on his difficult new assignment. He possessed certain admirable qualities: a rigid honesty, great courage, and the energy of a dynamo, in which respects he far surpassed the 5 agents who had preceded him at San Carlos. The flip side of Clum's character, however, was a cocksure vanity issuing in bombastic pronouncements and grandiose resolves. The year after John Clum was assigned to be the agent at San Carlos, the Apache were all on reservations, and so the incredibly effective, if brutal, General George Crook was sent to the Black Hills of South Dakota. Trouble was a-brewin' with the Lakota, who had treacherously, and with much malice aforethought, decided to live atop a place where we found gold. Clum liked playing dress-up and practicing military drill, and would seek to instill these passions in the Apache. This is mostly what I find so endearing about him, that and like his face. He's just silly. He was a silly, silly man. Clum, during his tenure at San Carlos, would create an Apache police force and court system. On one hand, you know, that's cool. Like that, it de-emphasized the military presence at San Carlos, but also, at times, those Apache police were sort of his private army. It's important to note just how much power John Clum had. It's absurd that the 23-year-old wasn't just administering the reservation, he was organizing it. Like he decided how everything ran. 23 years old. Was anyone even keeping an eye on his penis? Clum was the agent at San Carlos when the United States government sought to consolidate the Apache all on that one reservation. The real motivation behind this policy was, of course, opening up more land to white settlement. We needed more parking lots. Our thirst is insatiable. Listen, I get it. Defending genocides on the internet is like my favorite shit to do, but you want to defend a genocide, you need a good reason, and I don't think creating Phoenix, Arizona is a good enough reason. Creating Phoenix, Arizona might be the worst thing the United States government ever did. So Clum found himself in charge of an ever-increasing number of Native Americans at San Carlos as the policy went into effect. And still, they were the Chiricahua. Not being forced to wear tags, not farming, and indeed still continuing their raids into Mexico. Agent Clum in 1875 turned his attention to the one Apache band that had defied General Crook, the Chiricahuas of Cochise. In his dogged determination to relocate the Chiricahuas to San Carlos, Clum set in motion a series of increasingly tragic events that would cost thousands of lives. It also set him on a collision course with the man soon to be the most famous Indian in America, Geronimo. In my last video, I discussed Cochise, chief of the Chokonen Apache. As his stomach cancer grew increasingly severe, he orchestrated a peace with the U.S. government to ensure not only the survival of his people, but their dignity as well. Before Cochise's death, he also attempted to assure the succession of his eldest son, Taza, as chief. Chief was not a hereditary position among the Apache, and more to the point, Cochise commanded respect because of who he was, his bearing, his courage, his personality. He may have been chief of the Chokonen, but the Bedonkohe and the Nedni and the Chihene, they all listened to him as well because he was just that kind of guy that commanded respect. No one could really replace Cochise, and Taza never managed the same. Granted, he didn't get a chance to, but we'll get to that. Conflict would emerge on the Chiricahua Reservation in the wake of Cochise' death, and Taza struggled to keep the Apache together as his father had. While Tom Jeffords, longtime friend of Cochise and agent of the reservation, had outlawed the sale of whiskey, well, a white man communed with the one true God we all worship, the invisible hand of the market, hallowed be his name, and the one true God of free enterprise told this trader those Apache are thirsty. However, I must say, under no circumstances should you sell whiskey to Apache warriors in the 19th century. All right, don't do it. But if you absolutely must sell whiskey to Apache warriors in the 19th century, it is absolutely critical that you don't stop doing it. So yeah, the white trader got killed because he ignored both of those nuggets of wisdom. This, along with political pressure mounting, gold in the Dragoon Mountains, resulted in orders coming down from the very top. The treaty which Cochise had signed was to be made into toilet paper. The United States government smelled weakness and gold. And so John Clum was sent to the Chiricahua Reservation to tell them that they were to follow him back to San Carlos. This was breaking the treaty. So John Clum was sent to declare war on the Chiricahua Apache in person. And he walked out alive. He was totally fine. He was somewhat successful. The fact that he was not slowly dismembered boggles my mind. He's just going to keep doing this. He's going to walk into situations which should result in his immediate death. But he's fine. Why was he fine every time? Well, because he was my little man, and no one was allowed to hurt him. Clum convinced Taza to take his side. It appears that Taza wished to keep the peace that his father had negotiated, but of course, most Apache on the Chiricahua Reservation, they considered the treaty broken. Because it was. Here, the Apache emphasis on personal choice can best be seen. Taza, the chief, gave a speech to the Chiricahua, imploring them to keep peace with the White Eyes and come to San Carlos. But precious few Apache accompanied him, mostly women and children. The vast majority of warriors went with Geronimo, and Joe, who was the chief of the Nedni Apache. Geronimo was not a chief, and certainly never inspired so much respect as Mangus and Cochise. He was simply a fierce and accomplished warrior. Furthermore, as I related in the last video, Joe, who was the chief of the Nedni, had a very severe stutter, and so Geronimo would often speak on his behalf. The two were, in fact, childhood friends. Clum left Apache Pass for San Carlos June 12th with 325 Indians. About 1/3 of those supposed to be on the Chiricahua Reservation. The worst of the lot, some 400 and the doughty recalcitrants, Joe, Geronimo, and Nolgi, fooled Clum and fled into Sonora, and perhaps 200 others slipped off and made their way to the Ojo Caliente Reservation. Geronimo and Joe's Apache would straddle the border between Mexico and America, raiding into both nations while oftentimes returning to draw rations from the Ojo Caliente Reservation. The peace which had been negotiated with the Chiricahua was now broken. The Tucson Weekly Citizen applauded the end of Jeffords Reservation, which it described as a nursery for bad Indians. The Citizen pointed out that the former home of the Chiricahuas is a rich domain of mountain and valley, embracing some of the best mineral and agriculture features of the territory. The editor was certain that this region of great potential wealth would soon be thrown open to settlers. The end of the Chiricahua Reservation was disastrous. And while I've given Clum a lot of credit thus far, and will continue to, he did set off a chain reaction that resulted in 20 more years of war, because he gets to. He's my precious little man, and he's allowed to do whatever he wants. What's important is that the Chiricahua were at war with the US again, except for the Chihenne, who still had their reservation at their ancestral home of Ojo Caliente, where Geronimo and Joe kept drawing rations from. It's important to note that Victorio, the chief of the Chihenne, he didn't very much like Geronimo. Victorio had never approved of the ways of Geronimo, remembered his daughter. His way of warfare cost the lives of too many of the younger, less experienced warriors. He fought for his own glory, not for the welfare of his people. Victorio and Geronimo both stand in stark contrast to one another. Where Victorio was a chief who wasn't just a great warrior, but also a great leader, Geronimo was only a great warrior. Where Geronimo was a drunk who changed his mind every time the wind changed directions, Victorio not only didn't drink, he commanded his warriors to never drink whiskey while they were at war. Also, Victorio was always very committed to whatever path he chose to follow. He really should not have taken pity on Joe and Geronimo. I get it, him and his sister, they needed a full squad for Battlefield 6, but you shouldn't have done that. But something important is happening now in the story. My silly little man is in love. He was sweet on a girl in Chicago and wanted to go get married to his sweetheart. On his journey to the east, he brought an Apache entourage, which would reenact daring exploits on stage before an audience. Once again, Clum loved costumes and silly shit like this. And also, he was going to Chicago. Might have been going through O-Block. You need some Apache protection. It was during this tour of the American East that Taza fell ill with pneumonia and died. This only deepened the growing hatred the Chiricahua had for Clum, and many would forever suspect that he poisoned him. Of course, my precious little man would never do such a thing. Taza would be succeeded by his younger brother, Naichi, a man who, unlike Taza, had not been groomed for a leadership role by their father. Also unlike Taza, Naichi would be much more prone to influence from Geronimo. In general, Naichi seemed to have just not really been cut out for being an Apache chief, even during the best of times, and these were the worst of times. He liked women and dancing and would, in his later years, become a famous painter. He was a sensitive and fun-loving guy, and out of all the Apache, I think he's the man whose story makes me the saddest. He was a handsome man in his youth, and a tragic figure in his age. He felt that he had failed his people, and grieved over it till he died. When the United States found out that Victorio was harboring those renegades, Joe and Geronimo, at the Ojo Caliente Reservation, they sent their greatest warrior to capture them. My precious little man. When Clum arrived at the Ojo Caliente, he used a little trickery to lull Geronimo into a false sense of security. He pretended to be arriving with only 22 of his Apache police, while he had dozens hide and wait for his signal to pop out and get the drop on Geronimo. The plan went off without a hitch, because he was God's favorite goofball, and everything worked out for this little guy. Clum placed Geronimo in chains, locked him up at San Carlos, and seems to have told him repeatedly that he's gonna get hanged, and that was something he very much intended to do. Luckily for Geronimo, Clum would resign after he grew just far too frustrated with the US Army's constant interfering with his plans and his authority. Why are you not respecting my little man? Clum had Geronimo clapped into chains, but not before his prisoners spat out his contempt. You were the false wide-eye who came to the Chiricahua Reservation a year ago and broke the peace treaty made by the great Chief Cochise and Tom Jeffords and the one-armed General Howard. Do not talk to me about breaking treaties, you and your sick brain. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Clum had one more task at the Ojo Caliente. As Buffalo soldiers arrived to reinforce Clum's Apache police force, Victorio was informed that he was also to join Geronimo's people at the San Carlos Reservation. His own treaty was broken. To resist at this point would have been suicide, but before the Chihenne left their home, they cached weapons and supplies around the Ojo Caliente. God's little goofball had done it and was now in charge of, I shit you not, 5,000 pissed off Apache. Geronimo's entire life was this endless succession of haunting, horrible things. But we really should not disregard what happened here. Imagine you once moved like the wind, wherever you wished. And now you're in chains, cooking to death inside a jailhouse, and you're being told mockingly by a strange little man that you're getting hanged tomorrow. And tomorrow never comes. In the dead of night, over 300 Chihenne Apache, under Victorio's leadership, slipped away from San Carlos and returned to the Ojo Caliente hot springs, killing a dozen ranchers and stealing their cattle on the way. This war would end shortly, once they were surrounded by the US military, and the military gave them simple terms. Stop raiding, and you can live at the Ojo Caliente. You know, like we let you do before all this bullshit started. You'd think the military was horny to fight Indians, but quite frankly, I think they were sick of fighting pissed-off Apache by 1877. They'd be doing it for another decade. Victorio and his Apache abided by the terms of this agreement for months. They didn't do any raiding, and they probably believed that everything had returned back to normal. But the curse of dual control reared its ugly head once again. The Department of the Interior then asked the War Department to deliver Victorio's Apache once more to San Carlos. The concentration policy was reaffirmed. Captain F.T. Bennett of the 9th Cavalry reached Ojo Caliente on October 8, 1878, to effect the transfer. Victorio told him that his home was here, and his people had been born here, and they loved their home, and further, that not a man of his band would go to San Carlos. Victorio and his people would not return, but rather escaped into the mountains of New Mexico for a time. From there, they would resume their war against the United States until they received word they could surrender at the Mescalero Apache Reservation. The Mescalero were the Apache which had taken Herman, remember. Slowly, the Chihenne would trickle in until eventually even Victorio surrendered. The Mescalero Reservation was no ojo caliente, but in order to ensure the survival of his people, Victorio would take this deal. The 2 years during which officials in Washington had toyed with the fate of his people had turned Victorio steadily more distrustful of whites. And new insults added to his dissatisfaction. When Victorio presented himself at the ration window, the Mescalero agent said that he could not issue the Chihenne chief any food unless he presented an official ration card. Victorio asked what he had to do to get a card. The agent replied, apparently with no sense of irony, that it would take at least a month for one to be issued in Washington and sent to New Mexico. Through the interpreter, Victorio observed, "A month is a long time to be without food." The agent turned back to his papers. Time passed uneasily at the Mescalero Reservation as tensions rose and rations continued to be denied to Victorio's people until, finally, something hilarious happened. The agent had a waist-long white beard of which he was very proud. Victorio grabbed him by it and began dragging him about the room and stopping occasionally to kick him. The agent cried to the interpreter, "Habla bonito" to them. The interpreter had realized it was useless to try to reason with Victorio, but had tried to make Russell understand that hunger is a pressing affair. Victorio finally released the agent and administered a parting kick, much to the enjoyment of his warriors. Okay, I know this chapter has been really complicated and sort of I'm sorry. Let's take a minute. Let's rewind it back. Let's really examine how fucking deranged this all is. We're back inside. I didn't film this portion right after the last portion. No, I film everything in order, so we can properly track the unraveling of my mental state. Let's go back a bit. Now, I'm not an artist, so I didn't draw anything. These are letters, use your fucking imagination. San Carlos, Ojo Caliente, Mescalero Reservation. V is Victorio and his Chihenne Apache. Victorio agreed to make peace with the US if they let him and his people live at the Ojo Caliente. Like a year passes after this treaty was signed, and the US decided they wanted the Ojo Caliente. So they trapped Victorio and his people, and they sent him to San Carlos, where they were humiliated, forced to wear tags, and had to live among their enemies. Victorio escapes with his people, and he returns to the Ojo Caliente. The army captures him, and they say, alright, just be nice, don't do any raids, and we'll let you live here again. And they do. They live there again. But then the Bureau of Indian Affairs says, I don't care, you're going back to San Carlos. So Victorio becomes a renegade again. And then he's told he can surrender at the Mescalero Reservation, and he settles for this. Anything but San Carlos. He settles for the Mescalero Reservation. And then they refuse to issue rations to him and his people. Would you rather die on the warpath or starve to death on the reservation? We talk about the genocides, right? Like the long walk of the Navajo and the Trail of Tears, all this horrible, horrible shit. But this is always the most frustrating part about the Indian Wars. I think this is a significant part of the reason these stories aren't well known or taught in schools. It's not just racism towards Indians, right? Nor shame even about how we treated them. This is a fucking mess. This is infuriating to write about, read about, and discuss. Like, you want, like, an atrocity, right? Go read about the Nad and Hutton massacre. You want an atrocity, go read about it. Very short, very simple. This is just confusing as fuck. Can you imagine how Victorio felt? I've taken great pains to illustrate how important freedom and liberty and independence was to the Apache, and this is the Wild West equivalent of the DM fucking V. So Victorio was done playing games. He followed all the paths that the United States government laid out for him, and they all led him to the same place, certain death. So he took the only path that remained. I like talking about the Apache, but I don't like talking about women. They have small, weak wrists and low gamer scores. They're a waste of goddamn time. The Apache perspective on women was complicated. Native American gender roles were as rich and varied as Native American languages, politics, and culture. The Haudenosaunee, famously, were governed in no small part by women. Maya women often acted as diplomats. Also, there's a pit in St. Louis filled with 30 women, who all were members of a harem almost definitely, and they were sacrificed for a god king, or 2 god kings. The point is, you're never going to catch me. I hid them really well. As far as the Apache were concerned, they were patriarchal. An Apache husband and father was expected to be able to keep his wife in line, and this did sometimes extend to beatings. Furthermore, unfaithful women had their noses cut off. The most important event in an Apache woman's life was not her wedding. They didn't really have one. You gave her dad the agreed upon number of horses, and you sleep in the same wickiup, and yeah, now you're married. Not very romantic. The most important day in an Apache girl's life was her puberty ceremony. The sequence of words, Apache puberty ceremony, that sounds a little disturbing. It's not. It was very nice. An Apache girl's puberty ceremony was a hallowed and respected occasion, which marked the girl's entrance into womanhood. A 4-day-long celebration of growth and change, a party to which everyone was invited. But what did womanhood entail? Well, marriage and child-rearing. The Apache perspective on women was complicated because, while Apache men did call the shots, and they enforced their power with physical violence, the Apache did not respect nor encourage weakness. While you may tell a girl in many cultures to not run, stay inside, do this, keep those soft feminine wrists and low gamer score, that's what makes you a woman in the first place, the Apache didn't raise no bitches. I don't give a shit what gender you are. If you can't do 30 tricep dips in under a minute, you're subhuman and I won't listen to you, and that's why the IRS is suing me. You want me to pay the Israel bill? You send a warrior to collect. Apaches encouraged their daughters to develop their physical strength. Children learned to mount an unsaddled horse without help. Boys and girls learned archery skills and pretended to hunt and stalk game. Many girls rivaled the fastest boys in foot races, and the swiftest participated in rabbit hunts. Girls and young women were expected to guard the camp and fight off attackers when the men were gone. They also learned different ways to escape and evade the enemy, which included camouflage and riding skills. One woman emerged from the gauntlet that was Apache daycare a cut above the rest. She would never marry. Good luck trying to fucking force her to. She was Victorio's confidant, his advisor, his priestess, and his sister. Her name was Lozen, and I'm really glad that Hollywood never made a movie about her, not because it'd be woke or whatever the fuck, they'd fuck her up so badly. She'd have a talking dragon sidekick. She was not a girl boss, she was a magnificent nightmare who held magical powers, and we'll get into Apache powers in the last video, but for now, she did have magic powers and you should keep that in mind. Lozen was spiritual. She was magnificent on a horse. She could handle her rifle as well as any man, most of whom she could outrun on foot. She wielded her knife with utmost skill, said a relative. She was a tall, broad-shouldered woman and very athletic, could ride and rope and shoot like a man, could mount without putting her foot in the stirrup. Victorio and his sister would be joined by Apache from other bands, and even some Comanche would join with them. Victorio didn't just inspire Apache, he inspired anyone that had grown to see what peace with the US truly meant for a Native American. Alright, now I'm not big on military history. Like, I talk about conflicts, but troop movements and tactics and weaponry and battles, like I don't give a shit about that. Fuck that, we ball. Geronimo rode a Ferris wheel. And we're trying to get to that, alright? But here are some broad strokes. Victorio and Lozen knew they could not win a war against the White Eyes, nor could they hope for sanctuary in Mexico, for Joe and Geronimo had stirred up the Mexicans against all Apaches. It was to be a war to the death, a last stand for the old ways with no hope of victory. No hope for anything save honor and the glory of a true warrior's death. Victorio would use the American-Mexican border to his tactical benefit, hopping back and forth to shake pursuers. Now, the American and Mexican governments would have an on-again, off-again deal as it pertained to the Apache. That deal being, okay, you can invade us for like a fucking minute if you help kill these goddamn Apache. That deal was off during Victorio's war, as Mexico's then president, Porfirio Diaz, was more concerned about a US invasion than he was about some Apache running amok all the way up there in Sonora and Chihuahua. I mentioned in the last video that Sonora had a brutal and genocidal scalp bounty on Apache men, women, and children. This policy was not only a result of the constant Apache raiding, but also the reality that Mexico City never really seemed to give a fuck about all this stuff that was constantly happening on their northern frontier. The feeling was, by this point, mutual. During Victorio's war, the governor of Chihuahua would outright permit American troops to enter his state if it meant putting an end to this Apache menace. That governor's cousin was a colonel by the name of Terrazas. Terrazas would raise a militia to fight Victorio, and he had no problem with recruitment. The promise of Apache scalps and slaves, as always, served to mobilize Mexican civilians. Also, joining Victorio on the warpath was one badass grandpa by the name of Nana. I've discussed now, Cochise, Joe, Geronimo, but Nana clears all of them. He was unbelievably scary, and he was like 80. He was that kind of old where no matter when I'm reading about him, the 1860s, the 70s, the 80s, he was just always old. He was born old. Although Nana appeared feeble and limped perceptibly from a broken foot, he seemed indestructible. He was to become the most uncompromising of all Apaches in their wars against the white man, but to his people he was a wise, kind, grandfatherly figure. He was the granduncle of Kewekla, and the child revered him for his tenderness to the young, his consideration of the women, his courtesy to his fellow warriors, and his complete devotion to his tribe. Terrazas would manage to accrue over 350 troops, both professional and volunteer, as he worked to capture Victorio's elusive band. Victorio's people took shelter at the Tres Castillos, and Victorio sent out Nana to steal ammunition, as it had been exhausted by their constant skirmishes with Americans across the border. The atmosphere at this time was desperate, and this desperation was made all the worse by the absence of Lozin, who'd gone off searching for a missing Apache woman despite the U.S. troops being nearby. Nobody spoke Lozin's name, which Kewekla knew meant that they thought she was dead. It was without his most trusted allies, his sister Lozin and the aged and wise warrior Nana, when the full weight of Colonel Terrazas' force bore down upon Victorio. Victorio died a warrior's death, and it's easy to romanticize that. But Victorio was a chief, first and foremost. Victorio didn't want a warrior's death, he wanted what was best for his people, and he believed that this defeat, which he knew was inevitable, was the best they could hope for. Colonel Terrazas marched into Chihuahua City victorious, his men carrying over 70 Apache scalps and many captured Apache women, who would be sold in the markets as slaves. All told, Terrazas made over $10,000 by selling Apache into slavery. Nana returned to Tres Castillos only to find his chief dead and his people scalped and smoking atop the makeshift funeral pyre. As winter approached, Nana led the pitiful remainder of Victorio's people back into New Mexico, where they made camp in the Florida mountains. A sentinel reported to Nana that a lone rider was approaching their camp. The rider was a woman, but she carried a rifle. Nana, who instantly knew who the rider must be, mounted his horse and rode forth to meet her. It was Lozin. She told Nana that during the flight to Mexico, she had stayed behind with a young Mescalero woman who was about to give birth. They concealed themselves as the Mescalero woman gave birth, even as the Bluecoats rode right past them. Nana and Lozin's ragged band of Chihenne Apache would continue the fight to survive in a rapidly changing Southwest. And while they eked out a meager existence in the mountains, they heard tell of a figure rising in prominence on the San Carlos Reservation. A prophet who spread a message of hope in a hopeless time. You can guess where this is going. The Apache Wars were over. Again. Victorio was dead. For the first time in decades, the border country could breathe easily, with no strong bands of Apaches in a position to spread terror and destruction, or so it was thought. Apacheria was growing up. Arizona had 14 weekly newspapers and 4 dailies, and they could now turn to mundane affairs. Tucsonians entered the year 1881 quietly enough, according to the Star, which reported, January 1st, everybody swore off from drinking, gambling, and all kindred vices. January 18th, the pledges and reform promises of New Year's are forgotten. But on the San Carlos Reservation, a man named Dosha Delcline was beginning to stir up trouble. Henceforth, we will call him the Dreamer. His vision was not unusual at the time, and was in fact something of a precursor to the phenomenon known as the ghost dance, which we'll discuss in more detail in our next video, as the most hopeless and sad story in all of human history. Alright, we have returned once again to the squinting portion of this video. Nana would travel in secret to San Carlos, hoping to hear this prophet's message. There, he and Joe would take part in a ritualistic circle dance, and claim to see visions of Mangus Coloradus, Cochise, and Victorio, all rising from the dead. Geronimo was more skeptical, but his longtime ally and chief, Joe, managed to convince him. Geronimo later confessed to Joe's son, Asa de Kluge, that he had never understood why he and Joe could have been so easily influenced by that medicine man, but he'd convinced them that the Apaches should leave revenge to Usan. What a nice prophecy. Imagine it, you and your people have been forced to put your hope in prophecy, as the material world has become increasingly hopeless and unpleasant. And then, to make it all worse, Tom Cruise hears about it. There wasn't an I in his last name. Lieutenant Tom Cruise, C-R-U-S-E. He is not particularly important to the story. He's a minor figure who helped to do the thing that you all know is about to happen. And I'm doing my irreverent YouTuber thing. I'm not going to bring him up again, but just imagine stepping out of a time machine and Tom Cruise is there in a cowboy hat and he greets you with his madman laugh. His commanding officer, General Carr, also said that this lieutenant possessed great activity, energy, and bravery in all occasions. So he was Tom Cruise. These are all Cruisian adjectives. The immortal warrior of Xenu has arrived! The dreamer was a short and thin man with few notable accomplishments before he became a prophet. He'd gone to the east on one of the many attempts the US made to impress the Apache with our industry and achievements, and yet mostly just terrified them that people could live like this. He also served as an Apache scout before he experienced his religious awakening. And a big part of what made the dreamer so scary to Americans was the influence he exercised over currently serving Apache scouts. Scouts heretofore thoroughly loyal became infected with wild enthusiasm. They demanded passes so that they might attend the dances. They overstayed their time. When they did return, they were exhausted, surly, insubordinate, unfit for duty, grumbling that this was Indian country, not the whites. The dreamer's prophecy brought hope, renewed purpose, and strength to a people that were truly struggling, and doesn't that just piss you off? Hope! During this time, Nana and Lozen would be inspired to stage a raid with the few warriors of Victorio which remained. Of course, the Americans wanted to catch Nana and hang him, but here's the thing. That old man was good, and that woman he was with, they were fucking unstoppable. Nana's raid was legendary in truth. In something like 6 weeks, the rheumatic old man led his handful of warriors over more than 1,000 miles of enemy territory, sometimes pounding 70 miles or more in a single day. During this campaign, they foraged on the countryside, fought a dozen skirmishes with troops, and won most of them. They killed from 30 to 50 Americans and wounded many more, captured 2 women and not less than 200 horses and mules, eluded pursuit by 1,000 soldiers and several hundred civilians, and did all this with a band that numbered 15 at the start and probably never counted more than 40. From the Indian viewpoint, it was a grand adventure. It might well have been the finale for the superannuated old brave's career. But it wasn't even that. God, I just feel so ineffectual right now. They just keep getting away. I want to hang someone. Oh, I know. Let's hang the prophet guy. Surely, nothing can go wrong with killing the prophet. In 1881, the dreamer was arrested by the military, and the Apache quickly attacked the troops who arrested him because, of course they fucking did. In the struggle, the dreamer was point-blank executed by the army in the presence of his wife and child. Hope destroyed. I mean, the mission accomplished. We did it. You know, this whole time and place was so fucked beyond belief, but nothing captures it quite as well as a spiritual leader getting shot in the head while being held prisoner. Yeah, he survived, actually. He didn't get executed. He lived through the gunshot wound to the head. General Carr ordered the body of the dreamer buried, but the troops discovered that the old man was yet alive. One of the soldiers took an axe and crushed it in the dreamer's skull. The Apaches would later duplicate this act on every white eye who fell into their hands. The 1870s for the Chiricahua Apache were a time where hope was ground to dust beneath a bureaucratic and uncaring reality. Cochise died of stomach cancer, and his death was used as an opportunity to break treaties which he'd signed. His son was taken east, and as far as the Chiricahua were concerned, was poisoned. And Victorio died on the warpath because he believed that peace was nothing more than a lie and a farce to the Americans. And a figure emerged with a prophecy that the good times would return, that dead legends would arise from the grave, and, well, would you believe me if this isn't even like the saddest story about a Native American religious movement which led to a violent American reprisal? This isn't even the second saddest story about a time that happened. You know, the story of Geronimo has been one which I've struggled to capture for a year now. His rise to prominence was slow and complicated, and without understanding the circumstances surrounding him, he can't be understood at all. I was afraid that telling you the story of Geronimo would hit like Herman's perspective on his own story. Herman blamed the Indians for the violence he saw. He blamed them for the fact that he did become a violent and hopeless young man. Who do you follow at this point? You followed power, and still you found yourself powerless. You followed hope, and still you found yourself hopeless. I asked, what kind of world do you need to be in to follow a man like Carnoviste? And I hope you've seen the sort of world that had been made for the Chiricahua by this point. Herman Lehman was a fascinating figure in the American West. His account is brutal and violent, but he did get a happy ending. That ending was with white people, and so white people good, Indians bad. You know, when he lived among the Indians, he fought a long and terrible war, which surely they loved doing. But Herman did blame the Apache and then later the Comanche who he lived with, like, for that violence. Which is sort of fucking crazy. As though they liked this, they wanted this. As if any woman wants to give birth in the middle of a war. Do you think that Mescalero Apache woman that Lozin was helping through labor, do you think she was happy about the situation? They could watch the soldiers passing from their hiding place. Imagine trying to give birth quietly. Oh wait, my analytics. What is the male equivalent of trying to give birth quietly? Imagine trying to play games without saying racial slurs. Herman's rehabilitation was heartwarming, and it's a nice part of an ugly book. But the tragedy is that he attributed his rehabilitation to the very civilization, which had destroyed a decade of his life. Herman wasn't rehabilitated by civilization, he was rehabilitated by the love of his family. I would try to run away from my family, but my brother Willie would bring me back and the women would cry around me. I did not like tears. At last, the kindness, tenderness, and gentleness of my good Christian mother, the affectionate love of my sisters, and the vigilance of my brothers gradually wove a net of love around me that is as lasting as time itself. Geronimo's family was scalped and left to rot in the desert. That's the kind of man you follow in a time like this. So they did.
A council was called. Geronimo reminded the assembled warriors of the treachery of the White Eyes against Mangus Coloradus at Fort McLean and Cochise at Apache Pass. Nor had Geronimo forgotten how Clum had placed chains on him at Ojo Caliente and then imprisoned him in the sweltering San Carlos guardhouse. It was, Geronimo argued, more manly to die on the warpath than to be killed in prison. Naiche was reluctant to break out of San Carlos, but he could see that Geronimo had won over the people, so they agreed to go. Late on the night of September 30th, 1881, Geronimo and Joe led 375 Chiricahuas south, out of San Carlos.
I guess we'll do an outro, why not? These flies are driving me insane. Otherwise, it is beautiful out here. I'm really enjoying these trips. I think for the Geronimo video, but this would mean it would have to be in January. Go to Skeleton Canyon, go to some of these places where Geronimo actually was, because this is Big Bend National Park. And I mean, it's beautiful, it's nice, and it is not nearly as far of a fucking drive, but I think to do the story right, I really want to go all out with that one. This is me at only 50% of my power. I mostly have just used the power to hold back the slurs, but I managed this time. And this thing is covered in spikes like you wouldn't fucking believe. But yeah, I walked into a plant and it was like this big, the spike, and like that much of it was in my fucking foot. Like right in the top. I'm pretty sure there's a tendon there, but I don't know. I'm feeling okay, so. Thank you for watching.